Have you ever wondered what would happen if a man were both an invincible warrior and an ascetic monk who was the first to found the modern banking system? Or why people are so afraid of Friday the 13th? At first glance, these questions may seem entirely unrelated, but strangely enough, they all lead back to a single intersection point, an organization that once existed in human history like a mysterious specter hidden between divine light and the shadows of power. A secret military order, both a symbol of unwavering loyalty and a source of dread across medieval Europe. They were the Knights Templar, holy warriors who once shook the foundations of the old continent. For centuries, they have inspired countless films and mystery novels such as The Knight of the Templar or Kingdom of Heaven. If you truly want to know who they were, let us take you back in time to an era when faith, sword, and power were woven together into a legendary destiny. In their chests burned hearts filled with undying faith in God. In their hands gleamed sacred swords shining with the light of justice, striking down the darkness of evil and demons. The Knights Templar, among the most renowned holy warriors in Christian history, were not only soldiers, but living embodiments of devotion and unyielding will. Many people may be familiar with the three great monotheistic religions that worship the same God: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. One extraordinary coincidence is that Jerusalem, a sacred city set in the heart of a barren desert, is considered a holy site in the belief systems of all three. Because of its sacred status, Jerusalem became the epicenter of countless bloody wars waged over centuries, a battle not just for land, but for faith, honor, and eternal salvation. During the First Crusade, 1096-1099, Christian armies from Europe defeated the Islamic Fatimid Caliphate and seized control of Jerusalem. From this victory, a French nobleman named Godfrey de Bouillon, one of the campaign's most brilliant commanders, founded the Kingdom of Jerusalem and became its first ruler. Yet he refused the title of king, calling himself instead the defender of the Holy Sepulchre as a humble acknowledgement before God. By the 12th century, Jerusalem was no longer merely a conquest, it had become the Promised Land. Tens of thousands of pilgrims from across Europe flocked there, yearning to walk the very soil where Jesus had lived, suffered, and risen. Though the sea routes from Europe to the Holy Land were somewhat secured by Crusader forces, the inland road from the coast to the Holy City remained fraught with danger. These pilgrim caravans, bearing faith and hope, were frequent targets of bloodthirsty raiders and Muslim warriors still burning with resentment. They were not merely robbed, but tortured and killed along their sacred journey. After the war, most Crusader forces returned to Europe, leaving behind only 300 knights and 300 infantry to guard the Kingdom of Jerusalem, a force far too small to protect such vast and sacred territory. This urgent situation called for a solution beyond ordinary courage. It required warriors not only fierce in battle, but wholly devoted to faith, ready to defend every step of the pilgrim's path, guiding the children of God toward the land where he was crucified to redeem humanity. And so the Knights Templar emerged like a choice written by destiny. They did not fight for glory, but for a cause far holier than any throne: to protect the life of the faith, to safeguard the path that leads to God. In the year 1119, in the desert lands of the Holy Land, where faith and the sword were forever intertwined, a French knight named Hugues de Payon HP, along with 8 trusted companions, made a bold and extraordinary decision. They sought an audience with King Baldwin II, the ruler of the Kingdom of Jerusalem at the time, and Patriarch Warmund of Jerusalem. There they presented a daring proposal to become the official guardians of Christian pilgrims traveling to the Holy City. 8 men, both warriors and monks in one form, vowed to live lives of asceticism, purity, and poverty. They renounced all worldly luxuries, swore not to marry, not to have children, and to obey the will of God absolutely. They devoted everything, their bodies, souls, and swords, to the protection of the faith and the sacred glory of the Lord. They would live as monks but act as warriors, a combination never seen before. To many of their contemporaries, this was unthinkable. How could one be a monk bound by the commandment, "Thou shalt not kill," and at the same time a warrior who lived and died by the sword? Yet Hugues de Payon held a different belief. He argued that killing in defense of the innocent and in the fight against evil was not a sin, but a sacred duty. To him, using force to protect justice was one of the highest forms of serving God. The merging of monastic vows and warrior spirit, he believed, would not drive God away, but rather invite divine blessing, protection, and strength. Convinced by their devotion and courage, King Baldwin II granted their request. He even generously gave them a headquarters on the Temple Mount, believed to be the ruins of King Solomon's Temple, the most sacred structure of ancient Judaism. And from there, the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, known to the world as the Knights Templar, were officially founded with Hugues de Payens as their first Grand Master. Speaking of Solomon's Temple, it is a mythic symbol that is inseparable from both history and religion. According to Jewish tradition, the temple was the house of worship for God, built on the Temple Mount by Solomon, the fourth king of a united Israel, and the man said to be the wisest who ever lived. The temple was constructed sometime between the 10th and 6th centuries BCE. Though no archaeological excavation has ever been conducted on the site due to extremely sensitive religious and political concerns, the Temple Mount remains in the minds of both Jews and Christians, the Sacred Heart of Faith. Solomon's Temple is also rumored to be the resting place of the Ark of the Covenant, one of the most sacred relics in the Old Testament. According to the Bible, the Ark was a golden chest that held the 2 stone tablets inscribed with the 10 Commandments given directly by God to Moses on Mount Sinai. The Ark was more than a symbol of the covenant between God and the Israelites. It was believed to contain divine power beyond comprehension. If you've ever seen the famous animated film, The Prince of Egypt, you likely recall the image of Moses parting the Red Sea and receiving the 10 Commandments. Moreover, there are countless tantalizing theories about the ruins of Solomon's Temple. Many believe that it was here in the hidden chambers beneath the mount that the Knights Templar discovered one of the most legendary relics of all time, the Holy Grail. According to legend, the Holy Grail was the cup used by Jesus during the Last Supper, where he shared bread and wine with his disciples before his crucifixion. Another version of the legend holds that it was the very cup used to collect his blood as he hung on the cross. It is believed that whoever possesses the Grail will gain supernatural strength, divine wisdom, and unimaginable power. Some scholars even claim the Grail is not an object, but a person. In Dan Brown's novel, The Da Vinci Code, he presents a controversial theory that Mary Magdalene, a close disciple of Jesus, was in fact his wife and the bearer of his divine bloodline. From there, the Knights Templar are said to have sworn an oath to protect that sacred lineage from all earthly powers. There are countless rumors suggesting the Templars possess sacred relics from the Ark of the Covenant to the Holy Grail, treasures believed to grant wealth, power, and abilities far beyond human understanding. But like all great legends, no definitive proof has ever been found to confirm that these mythical treasures ever truly existed, or that the warrior monks ever laid hands upon them. Now let's return to the main narrative. Conspiracy theories like these are captivating enough as they are. Possessing a sacred site as their headquarters, specifically the palace on the Temple Mount, greatly helped the Knights Templar attract a large number of new recruits. From there, not only did they expand in scale, but they also significantly increased their influence within the Christian world. With powerful backing from successive popes and high-ranking clergy, the Templar Order quickly became the epitome of sacrifice, loyalty, and unshakable faith. They were widely admired and received countless contributions and support, ranging from money, land, and businesses to noble-born sons offered as novice knights. Another tremendous privilege granted to the Templars was the papal bull Omni Datum Optimum, issued by Pope Innocent II. This decree granted the knights immunity from all local laws, meaning they could freely travel across borders, were exempt from paying taxes, and answered to no earthly authority other than the Pope himself. With a clear mission, a fervent religious spirit and power endorsed by the Holy See, the Templar Order grew at a breathtaking pace. On the military front, the Templars quickly became one of the most elite forces of the medieval era. Each knight, when riding into battle, was equipped with a one-handed sword roughly 90 cm in length, an ideal design for close combat on horseback. In addition to the sword, a symbol of honor and righteousness, they were also skilled in wielding other weapons like spears, bows, crossbows, and short blades, daggers. For armor, Templars wore padded undergarments, chainmail helmets, and either round or teardrop-shaped shields. Over time, they were also outfitted with early forms of plate armor, a precursor to the full-body steel armor seen in later centuries. Draped over their armor was the Order's official uniform, a white mantle emblazoned with a bold red cross over the chest, white symbolizing purity and holiness of spirit, while red represented their readiness for martyrdom. At first glance, the Templar Knights' gear may not have seemed much different from other contemporary forces. But what made them truly exceptional was this: every single knight, and this point cannot be overstated, was fully outfitted with top-quality armor and weaponry, an extremely rare thing in medieval armies, where soldiers often had to arm themselves out of pocket. The Templars achieved this thanks to their outstanding financial management, an aspect that will be explored further later in the story. Armed with superior weaponry and steely resolve, the Knights Templar took part in countless brutal battles to defend the Holy Land against Islamic armies. They served as heavy cavalry, often spearheading assaults that shattered enemy defenses. One of the most emblematic Templar victories occurred at the Battle of Mongassard in 1177. On November 18th of that year, Saladin, the legendary military commander of the Islamic world, hailed as the champion of the Arab Holy War, led a formidable force of 26,000 troops to attack the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Confident in his overwhelming numerical advantage, he marched his army northward from Egypt along the Palestinian coast without hesitation. However, thanks to early intelligence, the Grand Master of the Templar Order at the time, Odo de Saint-Amand, swiftly rallied every knight he could muster and marched south to Gaza to intercept. Anticipating such a move, Saladin bypassed Gaza and instead advanced to besiege the port city of Ascalon Acre. Yet just hours before the Muslim forces arrived, the young King Baldwin IV, only 16 years old and already ravaged by leprosy, personally led 500 knights and several thousand infantry in a timely countermarch, forcing Saladin to alter his plans once again. Seeing the road to Jerusalem now wide open, Saladin confidently pushed his entire army forward toward the holy city, feeling as though he already had one foot inside heaven's gate. But that very confidence would usher in one of the greatest defeats of his military career. His overconfidence came at a heavy price. The champion of Allah began to relax his discipline, gradually losing control over his troops, allowing them to freely pillage and wander through the surrounding lands of Jerusalem, unaware that danger was silently creeping closer. Meanwhile, King Baldwin IV, the leper king, though tormented by a merciless illness, demonstrated the leadership of a great commander. Somehow he managed to send an urgent message to Grandmaster Odo de Saint-Amand in Gaza. Upon receiving it, the Templar Knights set out immediately without hesitation. They quickly joined forces with the king in Ascalon, forming an army of about 4,500 men, then surged northward like a thunderbolt toward Jerusalem. On November 25th of the 1177, exactly 1 week after Saladin departed from Egypt, his massive army was traversing a narrow pass near Mongassard, southeast of Jerusalem. No one expected that from the north Christian warriors would come flooding down like an avalanche. Leading the charge was Odo de Saint-Amand and 80 elite knights who boldly pierced straight into the heart of the Muslim formation with a decisive strike. They turned neither left nor right, they only advanced like arrows of destiny. Sunlight gleamed off their sacred swords, creating a blinding halo of brilliance like thunderbolts from heaven striking down upon their enemies. In the memory of chroniclers, that moment stood as a perfect symbol of valor, where 80 knights became one unstoppable force, unyielding and ready to die for their faith. At that moment, the Muslim army was already exhausted from a long march and was scattered across the region, unable to establish a solid defensive formation. The swift and fierce assault of the Templar Knights quickly broke through the enemy lines, paving the way for King Baldwin's reinforcements and infantry to surge forward. The Muslim forces fell into chaos, were crushed, and forced to retreat in disgrace. The holy city of Jerusalem had been saved. This triumph was born from the strategic brilliance of the crippled King Baldwin IV and the unyielding will of the Knights Templar warriors forged in the fires of faith and unmatched courage. Following the resounding victory at Mongassard, the Templar Knights, along with the Knights Hospitaller, continued their campaigns on the Iberian Peninsula. There they seized several key fortresses in Spain and Portugal, The spoils of warland treasure and human resources became a vital financial foundation that powered their future military operations in the Middle East. However, by the latter half of the 12th century, dark clouds began to gather. The Islamic world gradually united under the banner of Saladin, a warrior who had never forgotten the humiliation he suffered at Montgusar. Meanwhile, the Christian world was splintering. The once allied knightly orders began to quarrel over power, strategy, and purpose. The Templars, the Hospitallers, and the Teutonic Order became embroiled in long-standing internal disputes that dragged on for decades, severely weakening the collective strength of Christendom. In 1187, exactly a decade after Montgusar, Saladin led a massive force of 40,000 troops to invade the deeply divided Kingdom of Jerusalem. Following the death of King Baldwin IV, the throne passed to Guy de Lusignan, a man widely criticized for his lack of military competence. When Saladin besieged the city of Tiberias, the seasoned noble Raymond of Tripoli advised the king not to march out, warning that their current forces were no match for the Muslim army. But his counsel was ignored, partly due to political tensions, as Raymond had opposed Guy's ascension to the throne. Spurred on by Grand Master Gerard de Riedfort of the Templars, King Guy chose to engage the enemy. Disaster struck on July 4, 1187. The Christian army was utterly annihilated at the Battle of Hattin. Jerusalem fell. Of the 230 Templar Knights taken prisoner, only Grand Master Gerard was spared, every other captured. Templar was executed by beheading. Despite the catastrophic loss, the Knights Templar were still hailed as some of the bravest warriors in history. They fought to the last breath, never surrendering, never retreating, clinging to the unshakable belief that God was with them. That unwavering faith in iron will transform them into eternal icons of the chivalric spirit of the medieval age. After the fall of Jerusalem, the Templars were forced to abandon their stronghold and retreat to the coastal city of Acre, where they held out for nearly a century. But in 1291, Acre too was conquered by Muslim forces. The Templars had no choice but to evacuate the mainland, relocating their headquarters to the island of Cyprus and maintaining a small outpost on the island of Arwad off the coast of Syria. By the early 1300s, their final fortress fell to the Mamluk forces of Egypt. The Templars officially lost their last foothold in the Holy Land, marking the end of their centuries-long military glory. From that point on, their legendary image began to fade into history, and the support of the church gradually dwindled. Yet even as their military power waned, the economic and political influence of the Knights Templar remained formidable. Over nearly 2 centuries, in addition to protecting pilgrims and defending the Holy Land, they amassed enormous wealth. They received generous donations from nobles and the faithful across Europe, and served as trusted guardians of the possessions of countless knights and crusaders, men who willingly entrusted all their wealth to the Templars before setting off to fight in the East. Across all eras, valuable assets have always been magnets for thieves. But with their fearsome reputation and exceptional discipline, the Templars became the most reliable custodians of gold and treasure, ensuring not even a single coin would go missing. Moreover, pilgrims and merchants embarking on the treacherous journey to Jerusalem could deposit their assets with the Templars and receive a form of confirmation document, a paper equivalent of the deposited amount. Upon reaching their destination safely, they could redeem this document for the equivalent value. If this system sounds familiar, it was an early version of modern banking. These documents were the forerunners of checks and letters of credit, financial instruments born from the Templars' need to protect travelers, while also funding their military campaigns. This system not only protected travelers from robbery, since they no longer had to carry physical wealth, but also gave the Templars a massive reserve of capital to sustain their vast operations. Their affluence was further bolstered by their exemption from taxes granted by the Pope himself. The poor fellow soldiers of Christ, as they once called themselves, had now become a financial power so mighty that few dared challenge them. The image of 2 knights riding a single horse on the Templar seal, originally symbolizing humility and poverty, no longer reflected reality. Through donations, sponsorships, and financial transactions, the Knights Templar had built a vast banking network spanning across Europe and the Middle East. They controlled key trade routes, owned vast and fertile lands, managed farms, built churches, and fortified castles, and actively engaged in commerce, production, and import-export businesses. They even operated their own fleet of ships for logistics and transportation. At one point, the Templars even owned the entire island of Cyprus, a clear sign that they had grown far beyond the framework of a mere religious order. Many modern scholars regard the Knights Templar as the world's first multinational corporation. To keep cash flow circulating, they even offered financial services to various clients. While this may seem contradictory to the image of a religious institution, canon law at the time prohibited usury excessive interest, not lending at reasonable rates. For centuries, religious orders, including the Templars and major churches, served as creditors to monarchs and nobility across Europe. This growing financial clout would become one of the underlying reasons for the Templars' eventual downfall. From the 12th to the 14th century, the power of the Catholic Church gradually weakened across European kingdoms. As secular state structures became more developed, the role of religion in political life diminished. Once people were servants of God before being subjects of the king, but that order was now reversed. Tensions between the church and monarchs grew, especially as the church continued to control wealthy and militarized religious orders like the Knights Templar. Amidst this climate, Pope Boniface tried to expand papal authority over secular governments. This deeply angered many monarchs, particularly King Philip IV of France, who viewed the Pope's moves with increasing hostility. Tensions between the French crown and the Vatican escalated, rooted in both political and religious conflicts. When Pope Boniface VIII died in 1303 due to old age, King Philip saw an opportunity he couldn't ignore. Determined to eliminate papal interference once and for all, he quickly installed a puppet Pope Clement V on November 14, 1305, a pontiff completely under his control. But there was another force causing the king great unease: the Knights Templar. For years, the French monarchy had entrusted them with managing national finances. Ironically, this meant Philip had lost direct control over royal funds, having to go through the Templars to access his own treasury. In essence, the king was forced to ask for money from the very institution he had once empowered. Worse yet, rumors swirled that the Templars, who operated independently of any local government, were secretly plotting to establish their own sovereign state on French soil, much like the Teutonic Knights in the Baltic or the Hospitallers in the Middle East. To complicate matters, the king was heavily indebted to the Templars, owing tens of millions of livres, a staggering sum at the time largely used to finance wars against England. All of this drove King Philip IV to a ruthless yet calculated decision to destroy the Templars, cancel the national debt, and eliminate the church's influence, thus consolidating all power within the monarchy. At dawn on Friday, October 13, 1307, a date forever etched in infamy, King Philip IV ordered the arrest of Grand Master Jacques de Molay and all Templar members at every commandery across France. The charges were heresy. New initiates were allegedly forced to spit on the cross, renounce Christ, worship Satan, and even encouraged to commit homosexual acts. The order was also accused of corruption, fraud, and treason. Imprisoned in dungeons, many Templars were tortured into confessing. Shortly after the arrests in France, Pope Clement V, under pressure from Philip, issued a directive to all Christian monarchs across Europe to arrest the Templars and seize their assets. Trials opened everywhere to prosecute them. While many members with legal training tried to defend themselves and their brethren, their efforts crumbled once Philip appointed his own trusted archbishop as chief inquisitor. By 1312, Clement V formally dissolved the Knights Templar. All their properties were confiscated and transferred to the Hospitallers. 2 years later, the remaining leaders were burned at the stake for heresy. On March 13, 1314, Grand Master Jacques de Molay and several senior commanders were executed in Paris. As the flames engulfed him, de Molay cried out a chilling curse: "God knows who is truly guilty. Misfortune will soon befall those who have condemned us." Whether his curse was real or not remains a mystery, but only 3 months later, King Philip IV died suddenly during a hunting trip. His sons would all die young, and the once mighty Capetian dynasty came to an end just 14 years later, giving way to the House of Valois. As for Pope Clement V, his death was even more bizarre. On the night of April 20th, 1314, as his body awaited burial, a lightning storm struck the church. A bolt of lightning pierced the roof and hit the area where his corpse lay, setting it ablaze and reducing it to ashes. Due to this strange and haunting series of events, Friday the 13th, The day the Templars fell became a symbol of bad luck across Europe, regarded as the most ominous day of the year. After the Templars' fall in France, their members across Europe were arrested, tried, or forced to join other military orders. A few fortunate ones escaped and lived out their days in peace. In Spain and Portugal, however, the monarchs refused to participate in the suppression. Instead, they allowed the Knights to continue operating under a new name, the Order of Christ. This order persisted until it was secularized in 1789, officially closing the final chapter of the Templars in history. Yet legends passed down through generations whisper that the Templars never truly vanished. Instead, they simply retreated into the shadows, continuing their mission to protect Christianity in secrecy as hidden guardians dwelling somewhere between history and myth. And thus our journey through the rise and fall of the Knights Templar comes to an end. But what do you think made the Templars so great and so mysterious? Their unmatched bravery, their pure faith, their extraordinary financial genius, or perhaps their haunting, tragic downfall? If you're curious about other military orders in history, feel free to leave a comment below. For now, this is Mina on behalf of the entire team saying goodbye. See you next time, and have a truly wonderful day.